exhibition of Austrian industry in Vienna. These rare weights are of the scrambled Millefiori type, as you can see here, and usually of traditional spherical form, a type known as the Venetian ball. Cylindrical and square weights are the rarest and earliest examples, and dated specimens are particularly scarce. The example on the right is unfortunately cracked in rather an unfortunate place, so made much less than it probably should have, but that one is dated 1845. Yeah. Bigaglia obtained the canes as paperweights from the Francini workshop. Giovanni Battista Francini made a variety of paperweight-related objects, not paperweights, but related objects, incorporating his canes and those of his son Giacomo. This included plaques, which were sometimes set into jewellery, and lids for snuff boxes, scent bottles, together with handles for walking sticks, parasols, and cutlery. The first portrait cane of a lady produced by Giacomo Francini was started in 1841, and it wasn't completed for some years later until 1845, and several versions of the so-called Angelina cane are known. That's the patch box you can see at the top with the portrait of Angelina in the middle. The Man in the Moon cane, which you see at the top of the knife handle far right, is an example of a cane produced by his son Giacomo. The pink rose, usually attributed to Giovanni, is thought to have been the inspiration for the famous Clichy rose. Francini had already been supplying Bigaglia for 15 years by 1846, and supplied the Millefiori that contributed to Bigaglia's success, a huge success at the Vienna exhibition, for which Francini became incredibly bitter. Bigaglia stopped making paperweights in 1847, only a few years after he'd started, for which he was forced to, when he was forced to close his workshop. Francini stopped making Millefiori objects the next year. Bigaglia's decision to stop making paperweights may well have been influenced by the instant success of the French makers. And the French wasted absolutely no time in producing paperweights of their own, led by the St. Louis glassworks. I can't not touch on the Bohemian-Silesian connection, because it was in Bohemia that a chemist by the name of Dr. Wilhelm Eduard Fuss made the first breakthroughs in Millefiori. He joined the Matern brothers in their glassworks at Hofmannsthal in 1830, where he was assisted by Franz Perl in conducting experiments to rediscover what was then a lost technique of making Millefiori. Those experiments were successful in 1833, when he succeeded in producing his first Millefiori canes. He left the Matern brothers in 1840, set up his own workshop in his chemical factory in Magdeburg, Schönebeck, in 1841, where he made jewellery and Millefiori decorated pieces such as small plaques and handles. The earrings and brooch you see on the left will be sold in 2020 and now in the Corning Museum of Glass. His workshop closed in 1842 because it just wasn't economically viable, and he gave up glassmaking altogether. However, his early experiments enabled Franz Perl to develop Millefiori glass at his glassworks in Karlsruhe, and arguably provided the foundations for the production of Millefiori paperweights in the mid-19th century. The canes in the bottle you see are unmistakably those of the Karlsruhe glassworks of circa 1841 to 2, or a little later. Some of them bear a strong similarity to technical drawings of Millefory rods made by Franz Pearl in 1837. It didn't make very much money because the stopper has been broken and restuck in the top. Amongst probably lesser known names in this technique is Friedrich Egermann, who contributed to the early years of manufacture with his numerous inventions, including Millefory, but also faceted weights with amber-stained bases, often etched with animal motifs. Egermann probably made Millefory paperweights for only a very short time, between 1846 and 1848, and his weights are often contain 7 distinctive canes, rose canes and composite canes, and you can see an example there on the far right. This is a particularly early piece, as the rods are, the canes used are longer than usually seen, showing what is the so-called skyscraper effect. The scalloped foot rim on that weight, on the jasper pedestal base, is probably unique. Several glassworks in the region of Bohemia and Silesia, which is now the Czech Republic and southwestern Poland, made glass paperweights during the Classic period, and many of these contain characteristic canes. The weight on the left contains a central dog silhouette and a number of distinctive composite canes, including the red and white striped so-called pie cane. It's generally thought that paperweights containing a J1848 date cane were produced by the Josephine glassworks near Schreiberhau in Silesia, directed under the direction of Franz Pearl. In 1848, this factory displayed a number of Millefory paperweights at an exhibition in Breslau, dedicated to what they called products embodying the artistic progress of the fatherland. It's not entirely clear what the letter J stands for, but people have suggested that it may be the initial of the name of the factory, or for the German for year, or the month of June, which was the month in which the 1848 exhibition at Breslau was held. The White Rabbit was a particularly rare silhouette cane used by this glassworks, and the Magnum paperweight you see in the middle includes both of the only 2 types of complex rabbit silhouette canes recorded. One is framed in red and the other is framed in green. The weight on the right has an unusual and particularly thick outer casing of clear glass, not seen in the standard weights if you compare it to the one in the middle. Gerd Mattis wrote about these with the suggestion that they were actually made as mule posts, which may have gone wrong at the point of manufacture or subsequently, and were cut down and repurposed as paperweights. Bonhams is lucky to be the only international sailor holding dedicated sales of glass and paperweights left. And it's a position we've held since Sotheby's and Christie's pulled out of the glass market in the mid-2000s. Our presence in the paperweight world increased relatively rapidly at this time, mainly following the closure of Sotheby's glass department in 2007. The sale of paperweights on the collection of the late Baroness de Bellay, held by us in 2010, a collection which made over £570,000 at the time, it still remains today the feather in our cap, and it took place at a time when the market for classic French paperweights was perhaps at its peak. Formed in America, London and latterly in Switzerland, the collection spanned 3 generations of a family of collectors, and contained many beautiful floral and Millefory designs of outstanding beauty and quite exquisite detail. The Baroness's grandfather, the American businessman Frederick Hunting Howell, began this collection in New York at the turn of the 20th century, when there was very little interest in the field. At this time, paperweights were generally overlooked and quite under-researched, and he was able to acquire a number of great rarities. Frederick eventually moved to London, where he passed his love of paperweights on to his son-in-law, Nello de Facci Negrati, who took up the pursuit of collecting them with quite quite some enthusiasm. Nello himself was from Venice, and he became especially interested in French paperweights, as he considered that they had ultimately been inspired by earlier Italian examples. He continued to add to this collection, focusing on weights from the French classic period of 1845 to 53, especially those of the great factories of Baccarat and Clichy, under the careful guidance of Cecil Davis, who was the leading London glass dealer at that time. Whilst the collection was in London in the 1920s, it was visited by leading paperweight collectors at the time, including Mrs. Abbott. And upon Nello's death, the collection passed to his daughter Liani, the future Baroness de Bellay. And following her marriage to Pierre, Baron de Bellay, the collection moved to Switzerland, where it remained until we sold it in 2010. Frederick particularly favoured paperweights of the mid-19th century, of French and American design, including Boston Sandwich Company flowers. But amongst the rarest weights in the collection were 4 Mount Washington Magnum bouquets. The Mount Washington firm flourished in America in the mid-19th century, and these weights are known for their particularly large size, some as big as 11 centimetres in diameter. The largest and most expensive on the far right sold for $24,000 at the time. The factory was founded in 1837 in South Boston by Deming Jarvis, who was one of the founders of the New England Glass Company, also founded Boston Sandwich, and later founded the Cape Cod Glass Company. The factory changed names, owners, and locations several times, but the paperweights largely seem to have been sidelined. Certainly fewer than 50 flower examples attributable to the factory are known today, of which only 5 or a handful or so also have fruit in the design. And the de Bellay collection included 2 such flower fruit weights, which you can see on the screen there. I'm just throwing in Russian paperweights. These were the first paperweights I ever researched and catalogued at Bonhams, and talk about throwing me in at the deep end. I was handed them and told to go off and do my research. And weights and seals of this kind were once ascribed to the Mount Washington glass works, owing to the particularly painterly similarities in the flowers and lampwork flowers encased within. But Cyrillic engraving on certainly some of the seals pointed to Russian origin. They're generally now considered to be Russian in origin. Paperweights, plaques and seals such as this were only produced in quite small numbers, many by the Diakovo Crystal Works and the Imperial Glass Works in Russia. And they would have been very expensive to buy in the 19th century. Nearly all Russian weights and plaques are cut and faceted such as this, usually quite crudely. Next slide, please. Back to Bellay, the French paperweights were particularly highly sought after at this time. The top lot was a rare Clichy double paperweight on the left, which sold for over £67,000. And this is the most expensive paperweight Bonhams has ever sold. This particular unique example by Clichy has a concentric Milleforey designed in a staved basket on top of a checker Milleforey paperweight. The Clichy bouquet in the middle contains a distinctive arrangement of flowers that clearly proved popular at the time, as a number of very similar paperweights by Clichy were made. The rose and the thistles presumably represent the union of England and Scotland, and the pansy is usually taken as a symbol of love. But it's been suggested that the present grouping with the pansy may also represent France, as this paperweight would have been made during the Crimean War, when Britain and France were allies. A rare Clichy convolvulus paperweight sold for over £28,000 in de Bellay, also called a Morning Glory. This is one of the rarest of all single flower paperweights. Fewer than 30 examples by Clichy are known, and they are either on a clear ground or on a filigree cushion, such as this one. The flowers themselves may all be in one colour, or they could be edged in a colour, or they can have 2 or 3 bands of colour. De Bellay's collection was particularly strong in rare carpet ground paperweights. These were mainly made by Baccarat and St. Louis, and also, they're extremely desirable because they are so visually striking. The Baccarat Choufleur ground weight French cauliflower on the left has a slightly looser and more uneven arrangement, an uneven carpet of canes, which gives the appearance of cauliflower. Whilst Baroness de Bellay filled obvious gaps in her grandfather and father's collection in her own lifetime, her attempts to find a Clichy moss ground paperweight proved elusive. In 2018, we offered the collection of Margaret Christine Ball, the late Countess Poulet, third wife and the widow of the 8th and last Earl Poulet. This included a Clichy moss ground paperweight on the left there. Sometimes these are called prairie ground weights, and this moss ground is possibly derived from Roman or Egyptian glass mosaic patterns. The distinctive version of the carpet ground is unique to Clichy and understandably amongst the most desirable paperweight ground colours. A Clichy moss ground Milleforie basket with a missing handle currently holds the world record price for any paperweight, and that sold in 1990 for over $250,000 in New York. A number of other paperweights had similarities to examples in the de Bellay collection sold some 8 years previously, including a virtually identical Baccarat green carpet ground you see in the middle there. The £7,500 price achieved for this relative to the $12,000 we got for the one in the de Bellay collection perhaps demonstrates the degree to which the market for classic French paperweights had softened since 2010. But having said that, the price achieved for a Baccarat blue carpet ground example, nearly £9,000, was more in line with what a similar blue ground example had made in de Bellay back in 2010. Baccarat also made stardust carpet grounds with hundreds of tiny white stars, some of which were reserved with garlands such as the one you see on the left. Rarer still are their panelled carpet grounds in the centre there, which the arrangement always consists of a cluster of canes in the centre, outlined with white canes, with 6 alternately coloured panels surrounding it. Unlike spaced Milleforie weights, unlike the spaced Milleforie carpet grounds by Baccarat, which are usually signed and dated, the panelled examples and the stardust examples are not. On the right, you see a typical carpet ground arrangement by St. Louis. This has 5 circlets of canes reserved on the carpet. Sometimes they have silhouette canes, sometimes they don't. The carpets by St. Louis are found in a variety of colours, but only the brown ones are signed and dated. In 2016, we sold paperweights from the Léon Darny collection. Léon was born in Cantal in 1928 and trained as a vet, establishing a country practice in the Pays de l'Odois region of Western France in the 1950s. He's one of the few French paperweight collectors I know of that was actually French. It's not a particularly common field of collecting in France. He was a prominent member of the local community there, passionate about the arts. In the 1960s, he and his wife discovered a passion for 19th century glass when they began to collect opaline glass and paperweights, sulfides, baguettes, and scent bottles. They formed a very impressive collection, buying at auction in both London and Paris. His scientific background encouraged him to investigate the origins of the glass, measuring density, refraction, and fluorescence to aid identification. He recorded his research in a series of books describing his collection, in which he pays tribute to the history of and the lives of 19th century craftsmen and the glass that they produced. These extensively illustrated books were self-published, complete with English translations, for which Paul Jokelson helped. Leon lent several special pieces for exhibition, including objects of fantasy at Corning Museum of Glass. His wife, Annette, died in 2008, and he decided to sell 100 pieces from his collection with Bonhams in 2016, at the time when he was 87. The highlights of his collection were really the paperweight-related objects, in particular the baguettes or ring holders. Theoretically, these could have been used as serving dishes at the table for fruit or cake, but as desk and dressing table accessories is more likely, and they were made in the classic period using paperweight techniques. Two exceptionally rare cliche examples with spaced concentric millefory designs set into the bowls and feet were finished with twisted ribbons at the rims, and they relate closely to paperweight vases and wafer stands. St. Louis baguette is similar to the example in the middle, but with a different colourway of blue and yellow, was shown at Corning's Objects of Fantasy exhibition, and there it was described at the time as one of only two known examples, so again, an exceptionally rare thing. A further cliche baguette with a green and white ribbon edge was shown at the same exhibition, all exceptionally rare things. In 2018, we sold the collection of the New York dealership Leo Kaplan. Around 17 years since they last exhibited in London. The contents of a 469-lot catalogue, which we call Transatlantic Taste, epitomised what was traditional post-war American collecting. Leo Kaplan was deemed a world authority on French and American paperweights, with many of the pieces in Corning Museum of Glass purchased through his gallery. By 2018, however, around the same time we sold the Poulet collection, the market had changed dramatically, perhaps more in New York than it had over here, with collecting habits shifting to focus on less on academic rarities and more on pieces that display well and look pretty. The Kaplans were in some ways the last of the breed, but the decision to sell in the UK proved right, with most of the pieces sold to British buyers for good prices. The son of Russian immigrants, Leo was born and raised in a modest home in the Bronx. He worked in the lumber business, but spent weekends antiquing with his wife Ruth, which led to the first antiques fair, an outdoor flea market, in 1965. In 1969, they were renting a shop on Madison Avenue for $400 a month. By the 1970s, Kaplan led New York in 6 specialist spheres: pre-Victorian British pottery and early English porcelain, Russian and Norwegian enamels, Wedgwood Fairyland luster, Stourbridge and French art glass, and antique and contemporary paperweights. The firm was latterly run by their children, Alan and Susie, and opened 6 days a week on East 57th Street, which was its 6th premises in downtown Manhattan until 2018. The decision to close was bittersweet, but made a bit easier by the landlord, as the cost of doing business in New York City had become incredibly prohibitive at that time. These are some of the highlights from the Kaplan collection, and it includes a St. Louis encased overlay weight in the middle there. The encased overlay technique was considered one of the most challenging techniques in paperweight making. The reheating and layering process required to make these weights was highly skilled work. Very few were made, and no two were identical. First, the overlaid weight had to be annealed, reheated carefully, and then faceted and engraved before being carefully reheated and covered with a layer of molten colourless glass. We're lucky to have sold several others over the years. These aren't from the Kaplan collection. With the high risk of cracking during the extra processes involved, it's actually little wonder that so few encased overweights were made. We sold one in pink and one in blue. The pink one did over £22,000 at the time. It came from a Canadian collection, and it's exceptional in, firstly, its colour and having 3 engraved panels. A few months ago, we sold one in blue. It had been repolished and had some evidence of bruising around the base and a chip to the foot rim, but I think the in excess of £12,000 these days is still quite a healthy price for such a weight. In 2021, we sold the Livingston collection of paperweights. They were a professional couple for whom collecting was a passion. They forged many firm friendships in the world of Chinese jades, and also in a number of other areas of personal interest. Their focus was intense, and they both read and researched extensively about each collection they developed. Their private jade collection was gathered from many areas of the world during travels undertaken 7 times a year, over a period of about 25 years. And it slowly took over most of the space in their house. The house was crammed with paperweights, about 300 in total, many on display on surfaces and shelves, but others crammed within entire chests of drawers full. They collected both antique and modern examples. We offered 79 lots, which included all of the good antique weights, and a handful of artist-signed modern weights. Here are some of the highlights from the Livingston collection. Stardust carpet crowns were produced by Baccarat, Clichy and St. Louis, but more so by Baccarat. The star canes in these rarities may all be white or have a coloured dot in their centres. Excuse me. They're most often found with space metaphori design incorporating silhouettes. An almost identical example made over £3,000 in the Debelle collection a decade or so earlier, so these seem to have held up well. Weights enclosing Lily of the Valley were made by St. Louis during the Classic period, but Pantin subsequently made weights with this flower several years later. These attributed to Pantin. Examples are rare and have either a white or a pink flower. And this example in the middle is thought to be the only example known which contains both colours. Paperweights with sodden snow grounds are amongst the rarest produced by Bacchus. The techniques involved in the encasing process would have been particularly challenging, hence their great rarity. The central feature in this example on the right, has been characteristically packed with a handful of smaller canes to prevent the design from slipping prior to encasing. The 2 oak leaf silhouettes you see are quite characteristic of Bacchus. The Livingston collection began what I call our signed Clichy years. Their most prized paperweight was a fully signed Clichy, which you see on the left. A full Clichy signature cane is extremely rare. Several Clichy scrambled paperweights contain fragments of this signature cane, but very few contain the complete version. Bonhams had never sold one with a full signature cane before, so this was new territory for us. The Livingstons had stuck gold star stickers on any paperweights they considered to be of great value, so that their children would know which were important when they died. Unfortunately, they stuck them on the top, not on the bottom. This one had 2 gold star stickers on it. A few months later, a lady near Leeds contacted me with another Clichy weight. She knew nothing much about it, except that it was Clichy, and that some paperweights could be quite valuable. It had been in a drawer for many years, having belonged to her parents, and sold for around a third of what the much larger example from the Livingston collection had made. In exactly the same sale and around the same time, a dealer contacted me to say that he had just bought a signed Clichy vase. He knew exactly what he was buying at the time, but it was in a badly photographed job lot at an auction on the Channel Islands. When he bought it, I don't think he knew that it was signed. In my research, I managed to trace 5 fully signed Clichy vases. 4 of these are in museums and 1 is in a private collection somewhere. None of the recorded fully signed Clichy vases have covers, and no other fully signed examples in this sort of generous baluster shape would appear to exist anywhere. So it was a great rarity. Unfortunately, the cover, although you can't see it in this picture, the cover is cracked and badly chipped around the flange. So he told me before he brought it in that he would throw that away and bring me the vase, and I went, no, it's the only known colour. When the sale went live with the vase and the paperweight just 6 months after we sold another signed Clichy, fully signed Clichy paperweight from the Livingston collection, I had an email from a dealer who said, can you tell me who's faking these? Because it's really quite unprecedented to have 3 such pieces in such a short space of time. I thought I'd finish by touching on Bacchus, which has proven to be a bit contentious recently. When attributing paperweights, we generally go by what's published in the books. And that stands up until somebody writes a more up-to-date version. Bacchus is a bit of a minefield, and when Bob Hall wrote his book on Old English paperweights, he wanted a lot of the weights to be Bacchus. And I know the feeling, because I wanted all the weights to be Bacchus as well. And so came up with early Bacchus and late Bacchus attributions. Recent work, however, by Alan Thornton, as I'm sure many of you know, in the last 4 to 5 years, has called into question what many of us know, and many of these traditional attributions. And I was caught out by the one in the middle. This is full Bacchus magnum sized. It's set in a basket. The basket's not multicoloured. And it has a classic Bacchus close-back appearance with a lovely arrangement of colours and canes that are very pleasing to the eye, in a way that so many Old English weights just aren't. Nevertheless, whilst the traditional attribution for this paperweight is Bacchus, the canes and the Victoria silhouette with a square bun at the back and an arched silhouette at the bottom by the shoulders has been reattributed to another unknown Old English maker. The owner of the Bacchus weight on the left, which made a very healthy amount of money, it did over £10,000. But it is a delicious example, I have to say, it's very nice. The same owner owned the pedestal weight on the right. The pedestal was consigned at the time I took it in as the only known Bacchus pedestal weight containing a Queen Victoria silhouette. No other one was recorded. Of course, after reading Alan's articles, I then had to give him a call and say I need to change the attribution and bring the estimate down quite a lot, on the grounds of current research. And he exclaimed at me, but I bought it from Anne George's Bacchus, so he wasn't particularly happy. But it went on to make nearly £1,500, but as Bacchus, maybe it would have done, maybe you could have put a 0 on that, I don't know. Whilst the market for more standard French weights has cooled, the rarest examples are still making 5 figures. In 2021, we sold a Clichy yellow convolvulus paperweight for over £10,000. Last Christmas, we sold the St. Louis encased overlay weight we've already seen for over £12,000. Last year, we also sold a rare St. Louis tricolour weight for nearly £11,000. And this is one of only a handful of weights, of these weights made by St. Louis to commemorate the 1848 French Revolution, with only perhaps five or six examples known. The tricolour has its origins in the union of the king, represented by the white, and Paris, which is the blue and red. But what we've really seen in the last few years is a significant increase in the popularity of Bohemian and Silesian weights, which seem to have appreciated slightly in value over the last few years when backers and French have cooled slightly. This is the last slide. I couldn't not plug an upcoming sale, I'm afraid. We haven't had a standalone sale of Paperweight since the Belay collection in 2010. With the advent of online auctions, it means that I'm allowed to do things at a much lower threshold than I would normally be allowed to, and so we have our first standalone sale of Paperweights coming up, which will go live on the 22nd of March. This is not going to include antique weights. It is a new field for me. Traditionally, at most auctions, modern and contemporary paperweights fall into 20th century decorative arts and design, which is not my department. Unfortunately, at Bonhams, they don't want to do paperweights, so it lands with me. I've not really done much research into modern weights before, and in some ways it's easy because most of them say what they are on the bottom, but we're having this sale and it's going to include a significant number of American examples. It makes me very nervous because there's not much precedent at auction for American paperweights outside of America, so valuing them has been a bit tricky, but there will be examples by all of the big names, Dave Graeber, Tribuco, a lot of Paul Stanker's weights in there, Tarsitano, and because this isn't a traditional live auction, it means that we can now put things in that are a bit more affordable for everybody else, so prices will be starting at £100 rather than our usual sort of four figures. So it's going to be interesting to see how it does, but do keep an eye on that, because there's going to be some good things coming up. Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions for Jim?
I'll go first, that's all right.
Yes.
What do you think's driven the appreciation in Silesian weights over when everything else generally is going the other direction or standing still?
I don't really know the answer.
Sorry.
It depends who wants these things, really. And
there's not an emerging market somewhere that new collectors in other countries or anything like that.
no, I would say the ones we've sold have been bought by who I would call the usual suspects.
Right.
But when Silesian weights were not, we were putting things in at the same estimates that I'm putting them in for now, and they were going unsold 10 years ago. Now they seem to really be taking off. So I don't really know the reasons behind it, but I suppose perhaps an appreciation for this, and certainly there has been recent research in recent years about the role of Bohemia and Silesia in early paperweights. So why some markets are booming and others aren't. If I knew the answer, I'd be buying things myself.
Are these coming from an English source, or
Yes.
from America?
They're all from England. It wouldn't be economic to have them shipped from America over, all sensible. But it's also not economic to put a crate together and have them sent over to America for sale either. So we are selling them here, and it's going to be a good opportunity for anyone here in the UK, certainly, to acquire some really good American paperweights if you're interested, without the prohibitive shipping costs of getting them over from the States. So yeah, and some of these, the one in the middle is published in Paul's book, so they are good examples.
Is the catalogue ready to look at now?
No, it's ready to. The button is ready to be pushed, but I'm not allowed to push the button. So I have all of the control except that. So I will try and get them to get the catalogue up to look at in the next week. It will start on the 22nd of March. It runs like an eBay listing, so it's not a traditional auction. So each lot will finish, and this is really the way auctions are going now. removing the auctioneer altogether. Each lot will finish 10 minutes after the previous lot, so you will know exactly at what time your lot is coming up. But in order to prevent what we call sniping on eBay, where you wait till the last 5 seconds in the hope that you're going to outbid the last bidder, if you do that, it extends the listing by 10 minutes. So sniping is not a thing in these auctions. You can't wait till the last 5 seconds and hope you're going to get a bargain, because the listing will extend.
So you can't come into the auction house and bid on these?
Not in a traditional way. You can leave absentee bids and they'll place them through the system.
Is this
for you.
going to happen like the Americans just happened in America?
In America?
You had an auction, your auction in America.
Yes, that's it.
That's exactly what happened.
Yes.
And why don't you publish the final prices after the sale?
We do. Do we not?
You can't get into it.
That's probably a glitch with our website. But our website should have the final prices.
They don't allow. They say this is not publicised.
It will be on. Are you looking on the saleroom.com? If you look on the Bonhams website, it'll be there.
Oh right. Okay.
Yeah, look on the Bonhams website.
So these will be available to view in London?
There won't be a view, but if you'd like to come and see them, you can, because I can bring them down on a trolley. So, very glamorous. But the thing with the paperweight market, as all of you know, it's so heavily geared up towards America in many ways, that when we have paperweights on view, there are not a huge number of people that come to look at them. So these are really things that lend themselves very well to online sales without the traditional auction view, and it's a trial for us, and we're seeing how it goes. But because Bonhams has its thresholds that are sort of usually £1,000 upwards. The management don't like us taking in things that are too low value. But this method allows me to take in things that I wouldn't normally be allowed to take in. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting experience for me, certainly to see how it goes. Again, the prices, putting estimates on these, I go with what the same thing has made in America, but is it going to make the same over here as it will in the States? No idea. Certainly some really good examples of that type coming up.
So who have you attributed these to that up on the screen?
Well, generally who they are on the bottom. So we've got the Victor Trabucas salamander, 2 Paul Stankard weights in the middle, and the lower, the damselfly at the bottom. And the, God, name has just slipped my mind, Delmo Tarsitano spider from the Earthlife series.
Another one for me, if you don't mind.
Go on.
Bacchus. If the Bacchus paperweights that we know to be Bacchus today were thought to be something else and reattributed to another factory, what do you think that would do to the value if they weren't George Bacchus factory weights? What do you think would happen?
Well, if you go back, can you go back? No, never mind. The one with the Victoria silhouette in the middle got away as an after sale, and it went live as Bacchus until several people pointed out that it was no longer Bacchus. Because I hadn't kept up with my research, so just slapped the back of my wrist. And it went in at £2,000 to £3,000. And a Bacchus weight with a Victoria silhouette in it should be worth at least £2,000 to £3,000 these days. And it got away for about £1,200 after the sale as a non-Bacchus weight. There we are. That's it. Yes, I think it went in at about £2,000 and it sold for about half that after the event. I think as a Bacchus weight, it's over 10 centimetres large in diameter. It should have, I would have hoped it would have still been worth 2,000, but I mean, my mother always says to me, you know, if somebody paints as good as a constable but it doesn't have a constable name on it, why are they not worth as much as a constable? And it's the value that a name adds. People like to know that things are by somebody and who they're by. But having spoken to collectors of Bacchus, a lot of them buy based on how a weight looks. So is the design pleasing to the eye? Is it nice and centered? Is it an attractively formed weight? And I think a lot of value in these things is determined more by that, than by the attribution. You can say it's Old English, you can say it's Bacchus period. I think Bacchus does add a bit of a premium if it actually is Bacchus.
And do you think if all Bacchus weights were assigned to another factory, what would that, not just individual weights, because I can understand the middleweight there, to most people isn't as attractive as many Bacchus weights. But if they were all attributed to someone else, what would happen, do you think?
I suppose there would be some depreciation in the value because it would create some uncertainty. A lot of collectors would want the evidence for that backed up by something,
Sure.
certainly. But it would also depend on who the factory was, and I think part of the reasons why these Old English weights might not be making as much as Bacchus weights is because we don't know who made them. They're just Old English.
Yeah.
If you could put a name to them, I think if you can put a name to anything, it really, not just a paperweight, it really does help.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Any more questions? Okay. I'd just like to say on behalf of OPCC,